Hey guys! Welcome to my video. This is the first video of the channel with the intent to show the evolution of storytelling that AI manages via ChatGPT. As it updates, during its development, so too does the quality of writing. So far, the short stories are hilarious. So getting a kick out of this, I decided to share with everyone else. The format will have 3 AI-driven stories based on very loose input to help keep the stories as random as possible and only specifying type of story and scary entity. Here is the first story titled, "The Angry Ghost Lady That Probably Killed the Miller Family." There was once a grand old house on the outskirts of town, its tall turrets and gabled windows looming over the surrounding trees like a twisted version of a fairy tale castle. But this was no fairy tale, and the house had a dark history, one that the new owners, the Miller family, were about to discover. It all started with the strange noises. At first, they thought it was just the house settling, but as the nights went on, the sounds became more and more distinct. Footsteps in the hallway, doors creaking open and shut, and the ghostly whisper of a voice calling out from the shadows. The Millers tried to ignore it, but it was impossible. The ghostly presence was always there, watching, waiting. And then, one night, it made itself known in a terrifying way. Mr. Miller was awakened by the sound of his wife's screams. When he rushed to her room, he found her sitting up in bed, her eyes wide with terror. She pointed to the corner of the room, where a figure stood, shrouded in a hooded cloak. It was a ghost, and it was beckoning to her. From that night on, the ghost was a constant presence in the Millers' lives. It would appear in the most unexpected places, its cold, spectral hands reaching out to touch them. The family was trapped in their own home, prisoners to the ghost's malevolent will. They tried to leave, but the ghost followed them. It was always there, in the shadows, watching, waiting. And then, one night, it revealed its true form. It was the ghost of a woman, her face twisted in a grotesque mask of rage and hate. She had been murdered in the house many years ago, and her spirit had been trapped there ever since, seeking vengeance on anyone who dared to enter her home. The Miller family was never seen or heard from again. Some say the ghost still haunts the grand old house, her wrathful spirit forever trapped within its walls. Others say that the Millers are still there, ghostly prisoners in their own home, doomed to live out eternity in the haunted house. The end. Now for the second story titled, "Sarah and the Psycho Guy." The old abandoned dormitory on the edge of the college campus had always been a source of fascination for the students. It was said to be haunted by the spirits of the students who had died there in a fire many years ago. But for one student, Sarah, it was about to become a nightmare. Sarah had always been drawn to the abandoned building, and one night, she decided to explore it. As she made her way through the dusty halls, she heard strange noises and saw shadows moving in the corners of her eyes. But she pressed on, determined to uncover the secrets of the old dormitory. As she reached the top floor, she heard a sound that chilled her to the bone. It was the sound of someone crying, a man's voice filled with despair. Sarah followed the sound, and soon she came across a door that was slightly ajar. She pushed it open, and there, sitting in the corner of the room, was a man, his head in his hands, tears streaming down his face. The man was an escapee from the death row. He had been on the run for weeks, and he had stumbled upon this abandoned dormitory as a hideout. He begged for Sarah's help and promised her that he would not harm her. But Sarah couldn't shake off the feeling of fear and unease that was creeping over her. The man, seeing her reluctance, revealed that he was innocent of the crime he had been convicted of, that he had been framed. Sarah, feeling sympathetic towards him, agreed to help him. As the night went on, Sarah and the escapee, John, grew closer. They talked about their pasts and their fears, and Sarah found herself drawn to John's vulnerability and his tragic story. But, as the night grew late, something began to change in John. His demeanor became more aggressive, his eyes wild and crazed. He began to talk about how he had been wrongfully convicted, how he had been betrayed by the system and everyone who had ever claimed to care about him. Sarah started to realize that John was not the innocent man he had claimed to be, and she needed to get out of there. But it was too late. John lunged at her, his hands closing around her throat. Sarah fought back with all her might, but she was no match for John's strength. And then, just as she was about to black out, something inside her snapped. She felt a surge of power, a dark energy that seemed to come from deep within her. And with a scream, she fought back, her strength matching John's. And with a final burst of energy, she overpowered him, leaving him lying on the ground, unconscious. When the police arrived, they found Sarah standing over John's body, her eyes wide and wild, her hands still shaking with adrenaline. But, as they looked closer, they saw something even more terrifying. The fire that had ravaged the dormitory so many years ago had left deep scars on Sarah. She was not just a college student, she was a ghost too, and she had been seeking revenge on the living all this time. The end. I won't lie. The ending was dope. I mean, holy crap, I was not expecting to be pulled in by this story. Started off rough and ended like a champ. Also, the AI seems to like ghosts, seeing as I didn't bring up ghosts in the promo and only specified serial killer, death row escapee and co-ed in an abandoned dorm. Final story for you this evening is Emily and still a better love story than Twilight. The world had been overrun by zombies, and humanity was on the brink of extinction. Among the survivors was a young girl named Emily, who had been wandering the deserted streets alone for what felt like an eternity. She was scrappy and resourceful, but she was also scared and alone. One day, as she was scavenging for supplies, she heard a strange noise coming from an abandoned building. She cautiously made her way inside, her heart pounding in her chest. As she crept through the dark halls, she heard a sound that made her blood run cold, the shuffling of zombie. Emily knew she had to move quickly if she wanted to survive. She fought her way through the hordes of zombies, using whatever she could find as weapons. But just as she thought she had made it out alive, she was tackled from behind. As she hit the ground, she expected to feel the cold dead hands of a zombie tearing at her flesh. But instead, she felt a pair of warm hands on her shoulders, pulling her to her feet. She looked up to see a man standing before her, his eyes dark and mysterious. He introduced himself as Alexander, a vampire who had been surviving in the apocalypse by keeping a low profile and avoiding the zombies. He offered to protect Emily, and in her desperate state, she accepted his offer. As they traveled together, Alexander taught Emily how to fight and how to survive in this new world. She was fascinated by the vampire and his powers, and she soon found herself falling for him. But she also knew that there was a dark side to him, a monster lurking beneath the surface. As the days passed, Emily found herself changing, her senses became sharper, her strength increased, and her thirst for blood grew. And she finally realized that Alexander had turned her into a vampire too. At first, Emily was horrified by what had happened to her, but as she learned to embrace her new powers and her new life, she found that she was not so different from Alexander after all. Together, they roamed the desolate streets, fighting zombies and surviving in a world where the line between life and death had been forever blurred. In the end, Emily had found her place in the world and she was no longer alone. She had found a family in Alexander, and together they were the last of their kind, the last vampire in a world overrun by zombies. The end. I feel it was kinda my fault thinking adding vampires to a zombie apocalypse would be dope. My god. Of course she falls for some ancient map bloodsucker. ChatGPT limits asking for violence, so I have to just hope it's generated by the AI without asking, so thus we get these fun endings in the meantime. Haha. Well, I hope you enjoyed and I will toss out more content soon. Please subscribe and like so I can eventually pay off my season passes in my fav games or whatever. Adios.